Let's be honest, the Russian Grand Prix has a few issues. The track is boring, the scenery is average, the racing disappointing. But what a national anthem! Ever since I started doing these intros, I was looking forward to doing the Russian Grand Prix episode, since it has without a doubt the best national anthem on the calendar. Such power, such gravitas. It will even inspire the laziest of citizens to pick up his tools to go to work on the potato farms. So let me shut up so you can all enjoy this masterpiece in all its glory. Hello and welcome to the TF1 Show's recap of the Russian Grand Prix. I'm your host, Tinas Ferreira, the virtual safety car that ensures law and order in the crash fest that is the world of F1. And I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I basically recorded the entire episode and then my computer crashed and I lost basically my, all of my hard-earned and hard-worked recordings, so I'm pretty sad, as you can imagine, slightly frustrated, extremely disappointed, but I will soldier ahead and I will re-record and hopefully I will provide you with even more insight than what I would have provided you the first time around. So just as an aside, but I'm back on the horse, ready to share my thoughts with you on the Russian Grand Prix. And I think we can truly say that this was not a super interesting Grand Prix, but a very interesting Russian Grand Prix, mainly due to the fact that, previous Russian Grand Prix were just so incredibly boring. So let's kick off today's show by not talking about the victors, but maybe first about Ferrari. And I think we need to just get stuck into Ferrari's qualifying performance because they have been on a run as of late, 4 consecutive pole positions for Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, mainly I guess due to just that an incredible engine, but what a phenomenal job Ferrari and Charles Leclerc has been doing. Now, if you maybe look at Sebastian Vettel, he's definitely struggled a bit compared to his teammate, which has been definitely the case recently, ever since Leclerc made those adjustments to his car setup approach for qualifying specifically. And yes, it's an interesting problem that Vettel has, because it's still, despite the upgrades that they brought for Singapore, it still seems like they don't quite yet have the balance for Vettel where he needs, that stable rear end, as we've discussed in previous episodes. And if you look at the onboard, where they put Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel's qualifying laps next to each other, you can just see how much more aggressive Leclerc is on turn-in, and how much more comfortable he is compared to Vettel, who is a lot more conservative. He's a lot, he's very sort of, uncertain when he enters the corner. It just looks like he has no confidence in knowing exactly what the car is going to do, where Leclerc is a lot more free-spirited, if you can call it that. Now, I still believe that the Russian track did flatter Ferrari slightly, obviously firstly because of the 2 very long straights, but also even the corners are corners that the Ferrari is more, it's more in Ferrari's wheelhouse, similar to Bahrain. It's sort of 90 degrees, point and squirt corners, also a bit like Singapore last week. So I think Suzuka will probably be the true test in 2 weeks' time, and not maybe Russia. So I think if they can do well there, then we really know that Ferrari has the ultimate qualifying package, and that Mercedes and Red Bull need to be afraid, very, very afraid. And I think, the centerpiece of this package has to be that engine. The engine is incredible, and I think the Ferrari is now what they intended it to be at the beginning of the year. It's an efficient design, low drag, incredibly fast on the straights, but still fast enough around sort of the twistier bits of the track. And I think they finally figured out how to get that car into the right window. So I guess that's an exciting prospect, but as I've said, let's maybe wait another 2 weeks. The jury is still out for me slightly, and see whether they can, really become the dominant force in qualifying trim, especially. Now let's maybe move on to the race and talk about what happened there. I guess, there was a big hoo-ha about Ferrari and everything that happened over the first 15 or 20 laps. But Ferrari didn't lose the race because of what happened at the beginning. They didn't lose the race. They lost the race because Vettel's MG UK failed, and Mercedes then, obviously, given the strategy that they decided to be on, they took advantage of the fact that a virtual safety car then came out, and they effectively jumped Leclerc in the pit stop phase, which is fair enough. I think, not much Ferrari could have done about that little piece, but just the absolute shambles they were in at the beginning of the race in terms of mixed messaging, nobody knowing exactly what was going on. Now, for those that didn't know, let me quickly give you a short, abridged recap of what happened now. Obviously, Leclerc was in pole position, and Hamilton snuck in there in second place in qualifying, with Sebastian Vettel in third. And we obviously know about the very, very long run to turn 2. Turn 1 is effectively just part of the straight. I don't even know why they call it turn 1, but I digress. The run into turn 2, Ferrari obviously has the straight line speed, but there's obviously a risk that Hamilton can maybe get into a slipstream and overtake Leclerc on the opening straights. But Ferrari then, knowing all of this, hatched a brilliant or a dastardly plan where effectively Leclerc will tow Sebastian Vettel. He will ensure that Sebastian Vettel from third on the grid gets the slipstream from Leclerc, and then, effectively then negating the advantage that Hamilton would have gotten if he could have potentially slipstreamed Leclerc. But now, then, what ended up happening, and from the sound of things, they did sort of plan for this eventuality, was the power of the slipstream was so big that Sebastian Vettel effectively, overtook Leclerc before they reached the end of the straight, which then meant that Leclerc was, having started in first position, is now in second, and Vettel, having started in third, is now first. And what then happened was just a hot mess, because Leclerc, being the gracious team player that he is, or that he tries to make himself out to be, was obviously immediately jumped on the radio and asked, listen, okay, so when are we swapping back? He held up his part of the bargain. Vettel got ahead of Hamilton as planned, and now he wants to be ahead again. And Ferrari said, no, Charles, just be patient. Vettel is going to let him through, during the next lap. Next lap comes, the next lap goes, Vettel is still ahead. And you can obviously hear all of this is broadcasted to, the public as we watch the race. And you can hear the team telling Vettel that Vettel needs to let Leclerc by. But Vettel is saying, no, but Hamilton is too close, which fair enough. He was pretty close, obviously, during the first few laps of the race. You would imagine, the field hasn't spread out that much yet. So Vettel said, let's push for another few laps to make sure that they can get a margin over Hamilton in third, to make sure that, when they do swap, and from the sound of things, Vettel wasn't that keen to swap regardless. Actually, after the race, he effectively sounded like the swap was never discussed. The only part that was discussed was the slipstream part, where Vettel got the help from Leclerc, And then Vettel just played dumb and sort of said no, he's not sure whether the plan was actually to swap the cars around explicitly afterwards. But in any case, Leclerc was getting increasingly agitated, and it was actually quite funny to listen to Leclerc really trying to not sound frustrated on the radio. Like he was trying super hard to sort of say no, he's just letting them know his feelings, but they'll discuss after the race, and he'll, he trusts the team to make sure what needs to happen happens. And it was just, I don't know, I just found it very funny how he wasn't fooling anyone. You could just feel how agitated Leclerc was in the car, but he was really, really trying to control sort of the message over the radio and to make it sound like he was, still being this very loyal team player, all the while being extremely, frustrated in the car. But I digress. What it came down to is Leclerc wanted to swap, Vettel didn't want to swap, and as it turns out, Vettel was actually pretty fast up ahead over the first stint, and he started pulling away from Leclerc, and the more he started pulling away, the more difficult it obviously became for Leclerc to justify doing the swap, because Hamilton was just sitting there parked 3 seconds behind Charles Leclerc, sort of matching their pace on his medium tires, and then that meant that Ferrari couldn't really do anything. And it also sounded like Ferrari was in two minds. They were telling Leclerc lap after lap that no, Vettel is going to let him through the next one. They told Vettel things, Vettel just ignored them. Leclerc was sort of getting confused, and it was just a big fat mess. And then they sort of tried to rectify the situation, which I found to be a bit dubious, but anyways, they then pitted Leclerc when they were supposed to pit him, and then basically left Vettel out 4 or 5 laps extra. Vettel's tires ran out. He got undercut by Leclerc as soon as they pitted Vettel, and then all seemed to be well. And then, the fateful MGUK failure for Sebastian Vettel happened. The virtual safety car came out, and then Mercedes effectively used the fact that they started on the medium tires and took advantage of the pit stop under the virtual safety car and jumped Leclerc. Now, as I said at the beginning, none of this really had such a big impact on the race result, if you can call it that, but it gave a very interesting and important snapshot into what is going on at Ferrari at the moment, and that things are not as well as it seems, where there seems to be a lot of paranoia, a lot of sort of hustling from Leclerc's side to make the team do what he believes they should be doing. Vettel sort of being the wily old fox, playing a bit of a few games, and the Ferrari pit wall just didn't seem to be able to deal with what was going on. And this is very important, especially for next year, because they need to figure out how they are going to manage the drivers. Because obviously, this season is almost on its head, but if they are going to continue this rich vein of form that they're on, they want to make sure that all of these, kinks, if you can call it that, are smoothed out by the time the next season rolls along, because you can't have what happened today the whole time next year. Ferrari can't fight amongst themselves while they have a Mercedes and a Red Bull making sure that they're maximizing their result every time. And what they should have done is they should have just accepted that, good for Vettel, he got a good start and he took advantage of the slipstream, he got ahead of Hamilton and he got ahead of Charles. They should have left it as is and let the race play out from there. Leclerc, I'm sure, would have had the opportunity to maybe challenge Vettel later on in the race, but at the moment they are trying so hard to not advantage the one over the other that they are effectively tripping themselves up. They are, weaving this intricate web with their, brilliant sort of slipstreaming, overtaking, swapping 1-2 driver plan that they hatched, and then it all just sort of went to shambles. And I guess it just wasn't a good look, and I think it raises more questions than answers is all I can say there. But, overall, encouraging weekend for Ferrari in terms of performance. They were quite strong in the race as well. They had good race pace. So I guess that will be their silver lining. Cool, let's quickly talk about Mercedes. Now, I think we can say that they pulled a whole litter of rabbits out of a hat to get that one to, given that they struggled throughout the whole weekend. On Friday, they were way off the pace. I was quite surprised. I thought Ferrari would probably still be ahead given the nature of the track, but that Mercedes would be cutting them close. And on Friday, it really didn't look that close at all. They even struggled a bit on race pace, but they buckled down. They fixed a whole host of things on the Friday night to get to Saturday. And Saturday, it looked a bit better already. And, Hamilton's qualifying lap to get second on the grid was actually very impressive, even though it didn't really count for much. And given Ferrari straight line speed at the race start. But, Mercedes, I think, as Hamilton said after the race, they put up a good fight. They absolutely maximized what they could get out of the car. And given the race situation that they were in, people are going to say that they lucked into this race, into the race victory. But, they played their cards right, and the harder, what does Gary Player say? The more I practice, the luckier I get. And they deliberately qualified on the mediums to create this tire offset. They knew that historically at Sochi, a safety car is quite a probable thing. So they thought, what? Our best chance to win this race is going to be to go long on the mediums and hope for a safety car to get the potential benefit of then pitting under that safety car. And it came to pass. So they put themselves in the position to benefit from that, and they did. And then secondly, even if there wasn't a safety car, I think what they would have done, and they even said on the radio, they were planning to go 15 laps longer than Ferrari. They were definitely going to keep Bottas out as well and use Bottas as a bit of a roadblock or a rear gunner to hold the Ferraris up after they pitted while Hamilton runs long, to basically negate the initial undercut advantage that they would have gained. So that could have been an interesting sort of bit of, what can you call it, tactics that they could have employed, but obviously it didn't turn out like that. So, they got lucky with the safety car, and it turned out brilliantly well for their championship campaign. They now have a 1-2. Hamilton got the fastest lap, so maximum points for Mercedes. And what that then means is they can wrap up the Constructors' Championship with a 1-2 at Suzuka. And with their package and the nature of the track, I think there's a good chance that they would be able to manage that. Now, in terms of the Driver Championship, I think we can all agree Valtteri Bottas isn't winning this thing. Sochi is one of his best tracks and one of Hamilton's worst tracks, and we can all agree that Hamilton was comprehensively faster in qualifying and in the race. So I think the end is nigh for the championship. Hamilton, I expect him to sew it up at around Mexico time if there are no reliability problems, but I guess it's never over until the fat lady sings. But she's cleared her voice and she's inhaled into her ample chest cavity and is about to utter her first note. So, in conclusion for Mercedes, I think they'll be leaving extremely pleased with Hamilton and his trusty steed Bottas now turning their sights to next year, and I think Mercedes as well. I think they are very much on the way in terms of developing their car for next year, given that they've effectively admitted that they really haven't developed this year's car much over the past 5-6 races, with their last upgrade expected to come for Japan. So let's see how that works out for them. Cool. Let's talk about Red Bull. I think it was a disappointing race for them overall after thinking that they will have the pace to match the Mercedes and the Ferraris. Now, they both took engine penalties, which then meant that their expectations were neutered to an extent. So I think they sort of knew that coming 5th and 6th or 4th and 5th, best of, behind Mercedes and Ferrari effectively, that was going to be their best result. And it did come to pass with Verstappen ending up in 4th place and Albon in 5th place. But I think if you look at their overall pace versus the Mercedes and the Ferrari, I think they'll be disappointed because they were slightly behind on pace itself. So I think even if they didn't have the engine penalties, they probably wouldn't have been able to hang on to the coattails of the other two teams. Now, Max Verstappen had a bit of an average weekend, I'd say. He did quite well to outqualify Valtteri Bottas, but that was obviously negated by the grid penalty. And Alex Albon had a bit of a horror weekend initially. I mean, Friday he struggled, Saturday he struggled. He was way off Max Verstappen's pace, and I think it also shows that there's definitely a very unique way that the Red Bull car generates its lap time, given that Albon, and obviously Gasly first and Albon now as well, is really struggling to get to grips with the car, where Max Verstappen has now been driving it for years, and he obviously knows how to get the best out of the car. So it's an interesting talking point, but I think Albon actually recovered incredibly well, starting from the pit lane. Obviously benefited a bit from the safety car like Mercedes did, but made all of the necessary overtakes, was aggressive when he had to be, and he basically finished in the position that was always going to be his best, his best bet, or his best possible outcome. And that's all he can do, basically. I mean, he did the job. He maybe didn't do it in the way that he would have wanted to, but I think he'll be pleased with his progress on the Sunday. And I think Red Bull will hope for a better time at Suzuka, given that it is going to be Honda's home race, and they have already now taken the new upgraded Spec 4 Honda engine. So I think we can all expect them to do slightly better in Japan. Alrighty, let's talk about the midfield quickly. And well done McLaren, well done Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. I think once again the best performing midfield team after, again, a very, very difficult Friday for them. They somehow turned it around, qualified incredibly well. Carlos Sainz had a brilliant Russian weekend, if you can call it that. He was best of the rest in qualifying, was way best of the rest in the race, really untroubled actually if you think about the midfield. So very impressive performance by Sainz, and nice to see him back where he belongs given the bad luck he's had recently. So again, I do think he's still so underrated in terms of how well he's doing. He's such a good all-round driver now, and there's not much more I can say. I think he's really doing a very good job for that team, as is Lando Norris. I think, Norris had a bit of, he was one of the guys caught out slightly by the virtual safety car and the safety car today, but not the end of the world. He still scored good points, and I think McLaren is now definitely well on his way to be 4th in the Constructors' Championship, given that Renault had a bit of another disappointing result. Not completely their fault, I'd admit. Hulkenberg, I think, was particularly impressive. He had really good speed over Ricciardo this weekend, and he was doing a really good job. Again, one of the guys that I think he had a bad pit stop, if I'm not mistaken. So just a few things didn't come together for him. I think he came home in 10th, scored 1 point. And then Daniel Ricciardo, he was in the accident on the first lap with Roman Grosjean and Antonio Giovinazzi. Not much he could have done there. He sustained some big damage and retired. So, yeah, I pity for Renault. I think they are definitely showing that the car is getting there. The car seems to be quite strong now. They just now need to start stringing results together like they did in Singapore last week. Now, Racing Point, can we just talk about Sergio Perez, where he did that thing again where you never see him, on the race feed, or the commentators never talk about him. And then all of a sudden he's in 7th with the potential to challenge for 6th. And he's just such a, guy that flies below the radar, but he consistently gets those strong results for the team. And I guess we need to just give a bit of a shout out to Lance Stroll, who got out of Q1, which for him is always an incredibly exciting achievement. So well done, Lance Stroll, on such a breakthrough. Haas had a good race today. I think Grosjean was again also unluckily taken out on the first lap, and then Magnussen had that silly 5-second penalty that relegated him to 9th because of how he rejoined the track. He didn't cross one of the bollards correctly, or actually I don't even know what the story was, but he effectively didn't rejoin the track in the proper fashion, and then they decided to give him a 5-second penalty over and above the fact that he was already effectively penalized by going off track. But, be that as it may, I think this was overall an encouraging weekend for Haas. Their car is, however, still the biggest enigma on the grid. And, depending on the direction of the wind or the percentage carbon dioxide in the air, they will either be 4th fastest or 9th fastest, and you just never know. And they also don't know. And I just love the fact that, every weekend they get to a track and it's like a lucky packet. They never know what's going to happen, and there's no way for them to understand why the car is being the way it is. And yeah, just the idea of a team pitching up, not knowing if they're going to be 6th on the grid or 18th on the grid. It's just a bit of a ridiculous situation. But anyways, Toro Rosso, not much to report. They had a bit of a struggle throughout. I think, Kvyat and Gasly, not their best performance, and I also don't think really a track where they expected to do that well on. So yeah, not much more I can say there. Alfa Romeo, Kimi Raikkonen, he's now had 3 shocking races in a row, and then Giovinazzi had the crash with Ricciardo and Grosjean at the beginning. Giovinazzi seems to have sorted out his qualifying pace, at least be now, I think, is consistently out-qualifying Kimi Raikkonen, but he's just not stringing the results together, is Antonio Giovinazzi. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can keep his drive, and if, someone like Nico Hülkenberg could potentially swoop in and steal it. Now, lastly, I think we probably have to talk about Williams, and what a disaster. And, things are usually bad for them, but what happened today is sad and shocking in equal measure, where they had to effectively retire Kubica's car for no reason other than that they can't risk him being out on track and potentially damaging parts on the car, given that Russell had a brake failure or something similar, which then meant that he, crashed into a wall, which then obviously damaged big parts of the car. So they have obviously a massive constraint around actually producing the parts that need to go on the car. And what that basically means is they have a bit of an issue with, they can't allow cars to have accidents, because then they don't have the spare parts to actually rebuild the cars, which is why they had to retire Robert Kubica. And that's just a horrible position to be in. And I actually don't know exactly what's going on at the team at the moment in terms of their finances and the operations, but it's not looking good. Okay, let's move on to the TF1 awards for the Russian Grand Prix. Okay, the Pista Maldonado Award for Most Underheaded Deed has to go to Ferrari and their strange brand of F1 communism. They were so obsessed with being equitable that they spent the first 20 laps not paying attention to the racing. They must stop trying to appease the drivers and let them race, with the appropriate rules of engagement, of course. The Lewis Hamilton #Blessed Award, well, I guess it'll have to go to Mercedes for that perfectly timed MGUK failure on Vettel's car, and then them benefiting under the safety car. But they always plan to go long, so I guess sometimes you make your own luck. Then lastly, the Nico Hülkenberg Podium Award for Unluckiest Driver has to go to poor Sebastian Vettel. He gets beaten into submission by Leclerc in qualifying, he gets the good start, he gets past Leclerc, he pulls away from Leclerc, he's hung out to dry by Ferrari when they refuse to pit him, he gets undercut by Leclerc, and then his MGUK blows up. It reads like the latest Lemony Snicket series of unfortunate events. Well, we might be approaching the tail end of this F1 season, but there are, as always, a multitude of questions to answer. Will Leclerc and Vettel become the new Hamilton and Rosberg? Will Leclerc's head explode from purely trying to remain as politically correct as possible? Will Hamilton finally get in there? We've only been waiting about 5 years, and every single race Peter Boddington insists for Hamilton to get in there, but we have yet to see Hamilton get in anywhere at all. As always, much to ponder. And that's it for another episode of the TF1 show, and thanks for giving poor little old me a chance and listening along. I'm as always happy to continue the stimulating conversation on Twitter or Instagram or whichever podcasting platform you are listening on. And it's 2 weeks till Suzuka, so we'll have to support each other through the next week to survive a week with no racing at all. Cheers.